Hey friends, you know how China loves to brag about lifting everyone out of poverty, about common prosperity, about how life has never been better. But here's the ugly truth. Not only the Chinese people are not buying luxury goods anymore, but they're also cutting back significantly on pork. Because right now, pork, the meat every Chinese family grew up eating, is dirt cheap and still unsold. When people cannot even afford their comfort food, the economic miracle is over. Pork prices are crashing. Farmers are going bankrupt. Corporate giants are drowning in 3 trillion yuan of debt. And now, virus ridden meat is flooding the Chinese markets. Welcome to the Great Chinese Pork Meltdown, where the world's biggest pork industry just turned into a bloodbath. Let's start with the numbers because they're just ugly. According to China's Ministry of Agriculture, pork prices have been fallen 10 weeks in a row, now at their lowest level in 4 years. In Beijing, supermarkets are selling pork at 14 yuan a kilo, which is about $1 per pound. Some shoppers are thrilled. They have never seen pork price this cheap. Of course they're happy. They don't see the pig farmers crying behind the scenes. For many farmers, every pig they sell, they lose money. That's not a business. That is a slow motion collapse. Even the big corporate producers in China like Muyuan and Xinxiwang, New Hope, have been slashing pig prices for months and still cannot sell enough. So the big players, the ones Beijing once showcased as proof of modern agriculture, are collapsing too. Together, China's 22 listed pig companies owe a combined 3.7 trillion yuan in debt, and that is about half a trillion US dollars. And they're dumping pigs at any price just to repay loans and keep their cash flow alive. They're not selling to make profit anymore. They're selling to just survive. I saw this kind of thing many times when I worked in finance when I was in China. You could always tell when a company was about to die. They act super busy while quietly bleeding out. That is where China's hawk giants are right now. And the farmers estimate that by year end, up to 2 million breeding souls will be culled, removed. That is not just a correction, that is massive liquidation. But here's what almost nobody talks about. This collapse in pork prices is not just about oversupply, it's about collapsing demand. You see, pork is the cornerstone of Chinese diets. So, in a healthy economy, if prices drop, consumption should surge. But not this time. Even at these rock bottom prices, Chinese consumers are not buying. Why? because they're broke. Deflation is not just a macro term. It is just visible in dinner plates. Households are just saving out of fear. Youth unemployment is sky high. And consumer confidence is in free fall. When pork, the cheapest, most basic meat in China, sits piling up unsold, it's not just a farming story anymore. It's a national economic symptom. This is what a deflationary collapse looks like. Warehouses full of meat nobody can afford to buy, and producers too indebted to stop producing it. The government wanted stability, but what they got was pure stagnation, I should say. A nation too scared to spend. And here's where it gets even stranger. If China really has 1.4 billion people, how on earth can pork consumption be this weak? We're not talking about lobsters or luxury steaks. We're talking about pig meat. The everyday food that fills lunchboxes and dumplings across China. If demand for basic meat is collapsing, maybe the real issue is not just income. Maybe it's also the actual size of the population. Because if there were truly 1.4 billion people eating 3 meals a day, this amount of pork wouldn't be sitting in cold storage unsold, leading to collapsing prices. Less consumption means fewer mouths. And fewer mouths means China's 1.4 billion number may be just another statistical fantasy, like its GDP numbers or its youth unemployment data. Cheap pork, empty markets, or pointing to one thing. There simply are not as many people as Beijing claims. Now, let's get to the heart of the story because this didn't come out of nowhere. Yes, there is oversupply, but here's the twist. Beijing caused it. Remember 2019 and 2020? The African swine fever wiped out half the country's pigs. So pork prices soared, and Chinese people were angry, and Beijing panicked because in China, pork is not just food, it's politics. And the government responded the only way it knows how. Massive intervention. Local officials handed out subsidies, cheap loans, free land. State banks were told to lend to anyone who can spell pig. They built these enormous industrial pig farms. Some with even like AI feeding systems and climate controlled bonds. Just really advanced propaganda. And the result is massive overcapacity. China went from a pork shortage to a pork glut in record time. And fast forward to now, the economy slows, demand falls, consumers cut back, but those mega farms cannot stop producing because they are buried in debt and the banks want their money back. So pork prices start to fall, which is a normal market signal. But Beijing doesn't like instability. So instead of letting the market fix itself, it decided to weaponize the crash. So last month, Chinese officials quietly summoned 25 major producers for what they called a capacity control meeting. The goal is to reduce the national sow herd to around 40 million head. They didn't issue direct orders. They just turned off the taps, cut subsidies, tightened credit, and just let prices freefall. The smaller and over-leveraged producers started collapsing. And when they did, the bigger state-backed giants just swooped in to buy their assets for pennies. So yes, the initial price drop was a normal market signal to oversupply. But this collapse was deliberate. Beijing built the oversupply and then crashed it, and is now using the wreckage to consolidate the power of big corporate giants. That is economic Darwinism with Chinese characteristics. The survival of the most politically royal. And just when you think this can get worse, now enter the viruses. The Chinese farmers are whispering about little fly that is code for African swine fever. It's been around for years, and it is still lethal. If it breaks out, entire farms are wiped out. But unfortunately, there's now another disease spreading in China, the Geta virus. It's already been detected in Guangdong, Fujian, Jiangxi, Sichuan, provinces that together produce over 30% of China's pork. And farmers are reporting that piglet survival rates are below 20%. And yet, the meat from these sick pigs is still showing up in markets. A butcher in Guangzhou said that in some places, they're selling infected pork for about 30 cents a pound. And she said that even elderly shoppers, because they're so poor, they're rushing to buy it. Unaware they're taking home meat that could be contaminated. So yes, the cheap pork price is not just a sign of economic collapse. It's now a public health risk. When I lived in Beijing, pork prices were watched as closely as the stock market. If pork went up, the Politburo panicked. If pork prices went down, farmers panicked. Either way, someone always suffered. Today, both sides are suffering. The farmers are broke. The vendors cannot pay rent. And the whole system just looks like a microcosm for China's economy. Overbuilt, over-leveraged, and now rotting from within.